Hello and welcome back to Code Snippets. Today we're going to be talking about user input. So this is what really makes a program dynamic and more usable and applicable. Because if you're running, as I mentioned in the previous video, if you have a calculator that no matter what you do with it, it always displays the number 14, that's not a good calculator. It doesn't work. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to get user input and use that in your programs to make your program more useful, more dynamic. All right, so how do we get user input? Well, first we need something called a scanner. So we're going to declare this and initialize it the same way we declare and initialize every other variable. So scanner is our data type, and then we need to give it a name. So typically you just call it input. And then we need an equal sign. And then here's where it gets a little different. We need to use the new keyword. So this is technically called instantiation, what we're doing here. But don't worry about what that means just yet. We'll talk about that when we get to classes and objects. So scanner input equals new, and then we repeat the data type, which is a scanner, and then we need parentheses. And then inside those parentheses, we're going to put system.in with a capital S. And now, if we save everything, if you notice we have a red underline and it says scanner cannot be resolved to a type. And then if you notice this first line says import scanner from java.util. Well, we can automatically do that if we do the Control-Shift-O, just like that. So now, as you can see, it's been imported. So now we have our scanner. How do we use it? Well, let's say we have an integer that we need to ask the user for. So whenever you're getting user input, I want you to remember that there's a call and a response, right? It's a question and an answer. So how do we ask a question? Well, we need to display a message to the screen. So we're going to sys out something like, let's do name and age. So enter your name. And then we'll put a colon, leave a space. And then after this, we can get input from the user. So the input needs to be stored in a variable. So we always need to declare whatever variable or whatever data type we're getting. So a name is text. So we're going to store that in a string. So string name. And then here's where we actually get the user input. So it equals the name of our scanner, which is input. Then we need to say dot next line. Great. So now we get the user input, and whatever they typed in the console gets returned here, and then it gets assigned using this assignment operator, as we've talked about before, into this string variable called name. So now we can ask for their age. So sys out, enter your age. And then here, instead of a string, we want an int, because that's how we measure age. It's a number, a whole number specifically. You wouldn't say you're 23.6 years old. That just doesn't make sense. You just say you're 23. So int age equals, and then instead of input.nextLine, we're going to say input.next int, because specifically we're asking for an int type variable. Now you might be wondering, well, if we use next int here, then why do we say next line instead of next string? And that's a very good question. It deals with how the scanner works and what it means to read text. I'm not going to go super in-depth with the scanner. I'll probably do that in the next video. So if you're really interested in understanding what's going on behind the scenes with the scanner, go ahead and watch that. But just understand that it's a next line, not next string. And I'll get a little bit more into it later on in this video, but for now, this is how you get user input. So now that we've got the user input, let's prove that we actually have those variables stored. So we're going to sys out, and I'm going to say your name is, and then I'm going to do plus name plus, and you are plus age years old. So just a very basic program. It's not actually doing anything of importance. I'm fairly certain I've mentioned this before. We have this is the plus operator or addition operator. What's happening here, though, when we're adding strings, we're concatenating them. So we're just sticking them together to make one big string out of this whole mess. So if you run this, again, it shows up down here in this console. This is where all our input and output appears. So enter your name. Well, my name is Noah, and I am 19. So your name is Noah, and you are 19 years old. So as you can see, we stored those values up here, and then we reference them again down here. And we can rerun this as many times as we want using different values every single time. Now, a little bit more information about the scanner. So we have next line and next int. So a little bit what's happening here. When we say next line, I'm going to open up Paint again, everyone's favorite. Let's say this whole window is the terminal, the console, which is this area right here. So it displays the message, what is your name? And then we have a scanner that starts here. And so we type in Noah, or whatever name you want to enter. And then we enter, we hit the enter key. So that's, I'll draw a little arrow right here. So that means we hit enter. So what the scanner does, right here, it starts here and it scans. When we say next line, it reads, keeps going, and then it sees this enter key right here. So it recognizes we hit the enter key, so it's going to take everything that it read previous and sends it back to wherever it was called. In this case, it was called as input.nextLine. So that's where this gets sent back. Then after, we display another message. Oh, before I go on, I should also say, it saw the enter, and so now the scanner moves down to the next line, or wherever input is asked for next. In this case, before we ask for input, we display the message, what is your age? So the scanner moves down again, because there's no user input there. And now this is where it starts reading. So I entered 19, and then I hit enter. So when we say next int, it reads this until it doesn't see an int anymore. In this case, this enter arrow is not a number, it's not an int, it's an arrow. A very bad looking arrow, but an arrow nonetheless. So it doesn't take the arrow because the arrow is not an int, so it actually stops right before it. So in this case, if we were to, so then it takes this number 19 and it returns it to, this was input.nextInt. Just like that. So if we were to then, after the next line, after the .nextInt, if we put another input.nextLine, since our scanner didn't recognize the arrow key, it just saw, hey, that's not a number, I'm going to stop reading. Since it didn't do that, the scanner is still right here. So when we say next line again, it's going to look for the next time you hit enter, which is actually just right here. So even if you had a third question, like what's your favorite color, the program wouldn't actually wait for you to respond because it already found the next arrow. So it would actually just continue, and it would send back an empty string, which we talked about before. So it's very important that you remember the following rule. Anytime you go from something that is not input.nextLine, when you go to input.nextLine, you need to put an extra input.nextLine in the middle. And that might sound a little confusing, so I will show you exactly what that means. So if we go back into here, first of all, when I say anything that's not input.nextLine, well, what does that include? Well, there's a bunch of different functions of a scanner that you can use. So, for example, we have input.nextLine, which gives you a string. Then we have input.next. So this is sort of getting into why there's no input.nextString, because input.nextString is kind of technically divided up into two different functions. And we'll talk about those in a second. Then we have input.nextInt, input.nextDouble, input.nextBoolean. And you also might be thinking, well, is there an input.nextChar? And there's not. This is not a function of input. You would have to use one of these and then just select the first char or go char by char. And I think I'll just dedicate another video going in more depth into scanners. So let's say we did add that third question. Sys out, enter your favorite color. And of course color is text, so that's going to be a string. Next, not next, we want line. And now let's see what happens. So theoretically, even though we're not going to, actually we will display the color. Sys out your favorite color is, and then color. So now let's run this. So we get enter your name, age, and then now it should say enter your favorite color and then allow me to enter. But it skipped it altogether. And that's because of this. So we went from something, oh, let me pull that up again. We went from something that's not input.nextLine to input.nextLine. So here we went from input.nextInt, which is not input.nextLine, then immediately followed it with a input.nextLine. So what we have to do after this input.nextInt is just say input.nextLine. So this is just moving the scanner down to that next line. So if we go over here, this is just making it recognize that arrow and move our scanner down appropriately to await our next input. So if we run this a second time, now it'll actually, well, oh, I'm sorry, that's my bad. Not has next line. I don't know how that happened. Try that one more time. And now it actually waits for me to type in the color purple. So now, as you can see, it works properly. So if you can do several, if we go back to this, if we have input.nextInt followed by nextInt followed by nextBoolean followed by next, that's fine. We don't need to put an extra one of these in there, because what'll happen is in this area, if we say, you know, enter your name, so that's a string, and then we follow it by enter your age. That would be input.nextInt, and then if we said something like enter your favorite number, or something like that, or height, or weight, whatever it may be. These are both input.nextInt, so what'll happen is we type some name here, and then if we type in a number here, and then hit enter, and then a number here, we'll say 33, and hit enter. When we say input.nextInt, yes, that only scans this, and it ignores the arrow, but when we say .nextInt again, it's going to skip this arrow. Well, it will read it and tell it to go to the next line, but it recognizes that wasn't an int, so it's going to keep going until it finds an int, which is right here. So we can show that if we get rid of this line, and we say int favnum equals input dot next int, and we change this around like so. Now we got rid of this next line, so theoretically it would just ignore the next input to the question, what is your favorite number? But if we run through it, as you can see, that is not the case. It actually still does wait for my input here, because we're not going from something that's not next line to dot next line. So that's the basics of getting user input. Always remember that if you're getting user input, you need to tell the user what you're asking for, or else they don't know what to enter, and they don't know whether or not, is the program running? Should I be waiting? Should I be typing something in? What do I type in? Because you always want to remember that there's two parts to a program. You have the program, well, I guess three parts. You have the program itself, and you have the programmer, and you also have the user. The user is the most important part of your program, because you don't know who the user is. It could be anyone, and you sort of want to assume that they know nothing about your program. So you want to make it as easy to use as possible. So that's why we need to include these questions so that the user knows exactly what to enter. So just going quickly through here, this is the question or the call, and this is the answer or the response. And you need to do that for every piece of user input. Question, answer. Question, answer. It's always back and forth. Call, response, question, answer. You can also liken it to if you're taking a test and all of the questions were blank, but they expected you to fill in the correct answer. You wouldn't be able to do it because you don't know what the test is asking of you. So it's very important that you keep that in mind. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some other stuff you can do with the scanner in the next video.